Hello friends, my name is carohittendulkar. Today I will discuss on how to make an application to sebi for registering as an investment advisor. First you decide whether you want to register as an individual entity or a non-individual entity. Okay. After you consider that, consider 4 points. First is the educational qualification. Next is the NISM certificate. Third is the experience, and last is the network certificate. Once you have decided, then go into the investment advisor regulation. In the investment advisory regulation, you will find form A as I have shown you behind. Now let us fill up this form line by line. The form is divided into 7 parts. Let us understand each part. Part 1. It is general information. First of all, point number A. Name, address of the registered office, address for correspondence and principal place of business, telephone number, fax number, email address of the applicant. So it talks about the applicant. The applicant means the entity which is the individual or non-individual. Okay. Point B is blank. Point C. Name, direct line number, mobile number and email of the contact persons and principal officer. It talks about the employees and the principal officer. Point D. Legal structure of the applicant. Whether the applicant is individual or non-individual. Point number E. Whether the applicant is a bank or NBFC. Point number F. Date and place of incorporation or establishment. It means for the entity and non-entity, both must have a date of incorporation. If it is individual, it is his date of birth. If the applicant is incorporated outside India, details of such incorporation. So point is clear. If it is incorporated outside India and wants to form an investment advisory entity in India, it must provide such details. Point G. Whether the applicant is engaged in investment advisory services prior to making application under these regulations. Normally it is a no, but if you are having an investment advisory before this, then you have to say yes. You will have to quote all the details then. Point number H. Whether the applicant is registered with SEBI, RBI, IRDA or PFRDA in any capacity. Okay. If so, details of such registration. Any capacity is talking. Provide details then. Point I. Write up on the activities of the applicant. It requires a write up of the present activity and the past activities. If you are newly incorporated and you don't have any activity, then you say that we are having future activity in such format. Part 2 spells out the details of the applicant. As I told you, there are two categories of applicants. One is individual and other is non-individual. So we'll talk about individuals first. What are the details required? So point number 1 for individuals. Whether the applicant and persons associated with investment advice comply with qualification and certification required under Regulation 7 and the applicant has submitted a declaration with respect to the same. So, regulation number 7 says that you must have the educational qualification. The qualification is already mentioned in the regulation. Then you must have the NISM certificate. Okay, once you are done with that, you have to make a declaration with effect to that you comply with regulation 7. It is a self-attested declaration, mind it. Point number 2. Copy of certification obtained in accordance with regulation 7.2. 7.2 mentions about the experience that you have. So you will have to take an experience certificate from your previous employers. Point number 3. Number of persons associated with investment advice, if any, who shall render investment advice under these regulations on behalf of the applicant, provide documents as mentioned in para point 1 to 2 above for such persons associated with the investment advice. So if you propose to have an employee or associate, any person associated with you, they must comply with educational qualification, NISM certificate and experience certificate. All these three must be taken from them. Point 4. Enclose identity proof and address proof of the applicant and persons associated with investment advice. Aadhaar card, PAN card. Point number 5. Details of ownership or details of ownership or directorship of the applicant in any company or partnership interest in any firm or LLP. So ownership or directorship of the applicant, it talks about the applicant. So if he is involved somewhere else, he must make a declaration with respect to that. Point number 6. Copy of income tax return or copy of form 16 for the last 3 years. Point 7. Copy of assets and liability statements and certification of net tangible assets certified by a chartered accountant, and it should not be more than 6 months old from the date of the application. Now, UDIN must be generated by the chartered accountant before on the certificate. Okay. In case the applicant is a company, point number 1 in that, shareholding pattern and profile of the directors. So you have to enclose identity proof and address proof of the directors. PAN card and Aadhaar card are sufficient. Number of persons associated with investment advice who render or propose to render investment advice under these regulations on behalf of the applicant. So you have to name each and every person who is in fact involved in giving investment advice in this company. Point 3. Declaration by the applicant that its principal officer and associate person with investment advice currently comply with the certification, qualification and experience requirement under regulation 7. So already I have mentioned regulation 7, it requires education, certification and experience. Point number 4. Declaration by the applicant that it shall ensure that its principal officer and person associated with investment advice comply with the certification and qualification requirement under regulation 7 at all times. At all times. It means that during the operational of the investment advisory certificate, they must hold a valid certificate. If they are not holding valid certificate, they cannot give investment advice. Point number 5. List of associated companies registered with SEBI, RBI, IRDA or PFRDA along with the registration number. So if you are a company which is associated with these four organizations, then make you have to provide the list along with the registration number. If applicant is a bank or NBFC, then copy of approval from RBI for undertaking investment advisory services. So if it is a bank or NBFC, prior approval of RBI is required. Then you can make an application for investment advisory. Point number 7 is net worth certificate by a chartered accountant, which is not more than 6 months old. Okay. And it must contain the UDIN number. Okay. Point number 8. Enclose identity proof and address proof of the applicant, principal officer and persons associated with investment advice. Identity proof and address of whom? Applicant, principal officer and persons associated with the investment advice. In case the applicant is a partnership firm or an LLP, then first point is name and beneficial ownership pattern of the partners, principal officer and persons associated with investment advice, engaged or proposed to be engaged in investment advice. So you have to provide the identity proof, that is the Aadhaar and PAN card. Okay. Then the name and beneficial ownership pattern. So you have to provide with the partnership agreement or LLP articles and memorandum of association, along with the PAN card and Aadhaar card of all the stakeholders. Point 2. Whether the aforesaid principal officer and person associated with investment advice comply with certification and qualification requirement under Regulation 7, and applicant has submitted a declaration with respect to the same. So he must comply with Regulation 7. Thereafter, he must also make a declaration that he complies with Regulation 7. Also, he must provide self-certified copies of supporting documents. Point 3. Copy of certification obtained by the aforesaid principal officer and persons associated with investment advice in accordance with Regulation 7, Subregulation 2. So this certificate I have already mentioned. You will have to make a declaration also with respect to this. Fourth point is declaration that the aforesaid principal officer and person associated with investment advice shall obtain fresh certificate before expiry of the validity of the existing certificate to ensure continuity in compliance with certification requirement. So it is a declaration, okay, that before the expiry of the certificate he will obtain that certificate. So if the certificate is expiring on 30th of this month, he must ensure that he complies with the certificate before 30th of that month. Okay. Fifth, copy of assets and liability statement and certificate of net worth of the partnership firm certified by a chartered accountant, which is not more than 6 months old at the time of application. Okay. Now, this certificate must carry the UDIN number. Okay. Now, I am going to take you to the next part. Part 3, business plan. First is propose business plan and means of achieving the same. So you have to have a business plan and the means to achieve this business plan. A write-up must be prepared. Point number 2. the type of products or securities on which investment advice is proposed to be rendered. So you have to talk or make a write up on the products and the securities on which you are going to give investment advice. Point number 3 is process for risk profiling of the client and for assessing suitability of advice. So you have to prepare a write up on this part as well. Part 4, details of infrastructure. First, you have to mention details of office space, office equipment, furniture and fixtures, communication facilities, research capacity, research software for undertaking investment advisory services. Point 2, declaration that the applicant has necessary infrastructure to effectively discharge the activity of an investment advisor. So you must make a declaration. Part 5, implementation of advice or execution services. So in that, provide a declaration that no consideration, including any commission or referral fee, whether embedded or indirect or otherwise by whatever name called, shall be received directly or indirectly at investment advisors group or family level for the services for the said services as the case may be. So you have to make a declaration. This declaration mentions no consideration or commission or referral fee which is embedded or indirectly or otherwise by whatever name called is received directly or indirectly by the investment advisor group or by the family. Point number 2, if the applicant is not non-individual, whether the applicant proposes to offer distribution services, you have to make a declaration with respect to this. If you make a declaration as a no, then you are through. If you make a declaration as yes, then you will have to provide relevant